User registration forms are one of the most repeated aspects across websites. Knowing how to create one is an essential skill that would surely not be wasted. Such forms are styled a bit differently to match the theme and all, but basics are pretty much the same. In this video, we shall create and design an HTML sign-up or registration form using multiple input controls and sections. By the end, you would be skilled enough to tweak and customize your own form. We have covered each input item individually in Definitive Guide to Forms video, so would focus on creating and styling the form in this one. The video is a short version of sign-up form creation video on this channel where I explain each CSS concept being used in excruciating detail, but that resulted in an hour-long video which most of us don't have time for in our busy lives. So in this one, I'll focus on creating and styling the registration form and just briefly describe the concepts used. And if there's any confusion, you can always refer to the larger video where you can use timeline markers to get details on the concept. Link to other videos provided in the description. I'm Ali from Learn Awesome. Let's go to Visual Studio Code and start coding. And by the way, I strongly suggest to follow and write the code with me, but that's up to you. Okay, let's start by adding a HTML file and adding boilerplate code in Visual Studio Code by typing HTML:5. Okay, so I'll start by adding a form element. Form. We describe the target where the form would be submitted along with the method to submit that. Now, if you remember from our presentation where I showed you the target form, we are going to add three sections, one for personal information, one for account information, and another one for additional information. So I'll start by adding the personal information section for which I'll be using the field set element. And all right, our first section is complete and it looks like, let me close it for a second and show you. So this is what our first section looks like, right? And if we see the preview, which is being generated by Microsoft's Live Preview extension for Visual Studio Code, this is what the form looks like at the moment. And you can clearly see it needs or badly needs some styling. So that's what we are going to do next by adding a CSS file. And we are also going to call it styled CSS. Let's link it with the HTML file using the link attribute in the head section. So link style sheet and href, we provide the name for the CSS and we are done. All right, let's start styling our form and we are going to start by making sure these labels remain pinned to the left and don't behave like this where they are going to the right side of the form. So to do that, I'm going to introduce a selector, personal info field set. If you remember, personal info field set was the ID of the field set element which described its section. So, and in CSS, the selectors work by using a hash sign followed by the ID of the container that you want to work with. And after this, we introduce a arrow sign and then the input element type that we are trying to style. So this essentially means style all the label elements that are contained in the element identified by personal info field set, right? And here we go. I'm going to use the float property of CSS, and what float does is it instructs the element to float either to the left or the right of the container and basically override the normal HTML flow. So in here, we are instructing the label elements to float always to the left, and you can immediately see the results. All the label elements are now pinned to the left side of the element. So I'm going to introduce some more styling, clear left. If there are any other elements to the left of the elements being styled, they are going to be removed. Width, we are going to give a consistent width to our label elements. It's not very clear right now, but if I do this, see this label element is taking this much space. And the interesting thing about float is that label is an inline element, but the float property applied on an inline element kind of changes it to a block element where you can specify the height and width as well. Something you can't do with the inline elements. Right, let me add a bit more text align left, which is going to align the text to the left. We're going to introduce a margin top of 3 pixels, which is going to make each label element 3 pixels away from its top or bottom neighbor. And we are also going to introduce margin bottom. So basically, there's going to be a 6 pixel difference between the top, between any two consecutive label elements within this section, right? If you can see the effect, see, without margins, with margins, look much better. The only thorny exception being this part and this label, because this label is not a child of this field set element. It's a child of a div element right here, the container for these radio buttons. So that is what we are going to fix now. So to do that, I'm going to copy this class name, and class, if you recall, ID is a unique identifier for elements in the web page, while class is also an identifier which can repeat. So I'm going to copy that, and we are going to apply all of these styles on the div element as well, using by adding a comma. And to select a class, we don't use hash, we use dot. So I do dot and do radio buttons, and yes, the div is now floating left. But the problem is that it applied all of these styles which were meant to be for label, but 90% of them were okay except this one. So it's restricting the div to 150 pixel, which we need to fix. So we're going to override that by doing dot radio buttons again and saying width 100%. That fixes it. All right, we have to apply 150 pixel width to this explicitly, and we also need to add a bit of gap between these elements. So let's do it first. So I say gap and 0.5 rem, which did nothing. Because gap cannot be applied on block elements, we need to change it to a display type called flex. So there can be inline, block, and there's also a CSS type called flex. I'm not gonna go in details on this one because that's a completely separate topic. But flex is a layout model just like block and inline. That is all I'm gonna tell now. Not gonna go in detail. So doing that fixes this problem and the gap as well, and it's gonna come in handy in my next part. So now let's fix this width of this label. And to do that, I'm gonna again say radio buttons and arrow, and I can use label, or I'm gonna use another type of selector, first child, because we only want to apply this width on the first label, not the others for the radio button labels. So I say 150 pixels, and yes, that fixes it pretty much, except for this gap, which is appearing because of this gap 0.5 rem. So to fix that, I'm going to introduce calc and subtract this 0.5 rem. And now everything is done. The personal information section looks pretty much complete, except for these input elements which are still unstyled, and let's fix those. But before we do that, let me show you the real state of the problem. So if I open this in Chrome, you can see that they are appearing in the first row only, unlike those label counterparts. And the problem is labels are now floating left, so they are out of the normal HTML flow. They are being pinned to the side of the container, while the input elements are still in the normal HTML flow. They are being rendered normally, so they are appearing right next to each other as normal inline elements. So to fix that, we also need to make them float left. And since we are not going to use clear left, they are going to appear to the right of the float left element, which is the label. So let's see that in action. So if I go here, and this time I'm going to use input in the selector, which is going to apply this on all the input elements that we are using of different types. And let's apply float left, save. And if I go back to Chrome and refresh, see, the problem is fixed. Next, we are gonna make them occupy the entire remaining space of the container. And to do that, I'm gonna head back and say width calc 100%, which basically means the entire width of the container minus the width that we applied to the label elements, which was 150 pixels. And we immediately see a problem that unlike our expectations, the input elements are not appearing on the side of the labels, they are appearing below. And why is that? To see that, we need to again head back to Chrome, and this time make an inspect. And let me select the input element and show you the issue. So our calculation is not taking into account the border and padding of the input element, which are also part of the, which needs to be which needs to be taken into account while calculating the width. So there are 4 pixels each side. So we are gonna incorporate that into our calculation. And if I go back, and 4 plus 4 is 8, so I'm gonna subtract 8 more pixels from my equation. And here we go. Everything looks good except for this date of birth, which appears slightly smaller. And why is that? We go back, and if we select the dbirth input element and head back, we see the padding on this one is different, except for the regular input elements, which had 2 plus 2 on each side. It has 2 plus 1 on one side and 0 and 2 on the other side. So we need to make the width consistent to for things to look good. So to fix that, I'm gonna say padding left being 2 pixels and padding right being 2 pixels. Yeah, so we override the default padding and now everything is consistently styled. Looks much better. So our personal information section is now complete. We are going to apply the same techniques. Next, we're going to add the account information section. So let's begin. We are running pretty late. This was supposed to be a short video, so let me quickly do that. Right, typing is done. Let's see that. Let's see how it looks. Right, same issues as the previous, the unstyled personal information section. So let's quickly fix that. Right, so what we are gonna do here is we're gonna add yet another comma and this time add another selector for account info field set. And yes, it's applied the styles on the label elements contained within here as well. No need to worry about the radio button since it doesn't contain any. And we are going to do the same for this. So I'm going to copy paste. Oh, I forgot this label here. All right. Right. Sorry about that. Okay, this looks good. Account information section looks good. Everything is consistently styled. Let's head back and add the additional information section, which is gonna have a bunch of other type of controls. Let me quickly type that. Let me close this one. All right, our additional information section is complete. Let's see how it looks. So it looks like this. We are using a variety of different types of controls in this section. So let's apply some styling. But this time we are not going to copy paste. We are going to do some things differently. So I'm going to say, and this time we are going to use another display property called inline-block, which sits between block and inline. So it kind of changes the inline elements such that you can apply width and height directly on those. So if we change our label to display inline block, we can apply width and height on these. So that's what we are going to do. And this time we're going to apply 150 pixels. And yes, without using float, we are able to apply 150 pixels to our labels. And let's add the others margin top 3 pixels, margin bottom 3 pixels, and vertical align top to align everything to the top side. Alright, we can see it didn't fix the problem all the way, and the elements are still appearing here. And the reason being we are not using float, which pins every label to the left side. So even though they have 150 pixel width assigned to them, they are not getting pinned to the left side. So we'll have to do that manually with this technique. And the way to do it is introduce line breaks. So that's what I'm gonna do after every input element or before every label element. Okay, things look much better now. So you can see there's still the issue of input elements not taking the entire width. So that's what we are gonna work on next. And to do that, we go back and here we are gonna apply another selector for the input element as well as text area. And we are gonna say the width is calc 100% minus 158 pixel like before. All right, there was a spelling mistake, so I fixed that, and we can clearly see it didn't go exactly as planned. There's still this problem of the input element appearing down, which means we are missing some pixels somewhere from our calculation, and the reason is again this inline block. So the inline block, uh, let me show you in Chrome browser. So let me open it in Chrome and bring it here. All right, and now if I go here to inspect, and let's say I make it 170 pixels just for the heck of it. Okay, now observe closely, and I can zoom in here a bit. This input element is starting with a gap from the label element compared to the input elements in previous sections. They are not aligned. It's a bit to the side, to the right side. And if I hover over the label element, you see the label element ends. I can show you with the mouse, but you can see where this blue line stops. That's where the label element is ending and the input element is starting after that. So there's a gap in between, and that gap is because of the inline block, which injects these gaps between elements. It's a built-in mechanism. There's nothing really we can do about it. So the way to tackle is to reduce this gap, remove this gap by CSS styling, and that's what we are going to do. So we head back and introduce margin, and this time we are going to do something interesting. We are going to say minus 4 pixels. And yes, you can see everything is perfectly aligned now. Here you can see. And minus 4 pixel basically is the opposite of margin. Margin is the gap between the element and its outside world. So we can space things apart using positive margin, but using negative margin, we are going to gulp up existing space. So that's what we did. And our form looks much better now. We're not going to go in styling um, the select element. That is fine. In my opinion, it's just gonna be weird on a big screen with just three small text options in a control that is spanning the entire web page or real estate. But we can do something about this gap here. So to do that, I'm just gonna copy, paste, select, and 3 pixels, 0 pixels, 0 pixels, and minus 4 pixel. Okay, what did I do here? Uh, we can apply all four margins, top, right, bottom, and left in one value using this four value margin property. So it's clockwise starting from top. So top, right, bottom, and left. So it introduced a 3 pixel margin from the top element and ate the 4 pixel gap that was appearing on the left side in one scoop. Right? Looks good. The last thing remaining to do is the submit button. So that's what we are gonna introduce next. I'm gonna type it first. Okay, so we have added this submit button with type of submit. So if when we click this button, due to this type submit, the form is going to be submitted to this localhost 8083, which is the action attribute of the form element. So I enclosed it in a div so we can style it. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to say submit container, text align center. And this is going to bring it in the center of the form horizontally. And then we're going to say margin top 4 pixels to make it stand out from rest of the form. And now we can also make it a different color. So sorry, input. And we are going to say background color. And I'm going to use get it blue here. Okay, our form is now complete. Let's have a look in Chrome. It's responsive and it looks like the intended target form that we said we are trying for. All right, that brings us to the end of the video. We are not gonna venture into styling of the individual input items in this video, which can also be done. So yeah, if you want me to make a video on that, like how to style these range elements, checkboxes, datetime local input fields, etc. Individually, please let me know via comments and I'll make a video about that as well. So please give a thumbs up if you liked the content. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much. Goodbye.